That was quick. Wow.
I know.
That flashed by. It's because we're in such a hurry because, the soccer practice, and soccer practice is the priority, without a doubt. In your world, it is, Ellie. I'm sure it's a really important thing. Isn't the World Cup coming up? Is your family very excited about that?
Sort of. We're in proximity to where it's going to be held, and so I think a lot of people are actually leaving town that week for the finals so that they don't get stuck. So I think all of us are going to be traveling during that sometime in July just to get out of here.
Well, I completely understand that. You can make some money if you're Airbnb-ing those places during that time. Because
they have made an ordinance that people can't Airbnb because they don't want parties and like houses broken and streets trashed, because people pay $20,000 a night to stay in a house for the World Cup. So
really?
They made an ordinance. So now
I'm sure people are following those rules. But we digress. We're here on Narativ Live tonight to talk about all things Epstein and more, because there's more coming up later on with Jacob Carsbo as well joining us. Maybe in the second part of the show, we'll talk about Pete Hegseth's greater North America policy that he's introducing now. But we wanted to get together with Ellie because everybody knows Ellie Leonard's incredible work with the Epstein files. She writes at The Panicked Writer, and she and I have been getting some attention from people that we write about, which happens a lot of the time. You write about people, they have a right to respond. Sometimes they're well-known people like Michael Wolff and Michael Cohen. And I guess you raised a little bit of a few issues with Michael Wolff in the last couple of weeks regarding his involvement with the Epstein network and his involvement with Jeffrey and his involvement with the general, let's call it a network because it is what it is. And Donald Trump was involved in that, and Michael Cohen was involved in that. There's a whole lot of names that we all know. But for all intents and purposes, Michael Wolff has been, a good guy in most people's books. He's been an insider who's been telling the truth about Donald Trump, and he's had a close-up friendship with Jeffrey Epstein as well for many years, but he seems to have been on the up and up. And then the Epstein files came out, and they started telling a sort of a very different story about who Michael Wolff is. And just to set the scene a little bit, can you explain to me why Michael Wolff went from being, everyone's favorite Epstein insider to maybe he's not so what? You fill in the blank there. As we thought he was.
We thought he was.
Yeah.
I was as big a Michael Wolff fan as anyone, and as a transcriber, which is my little small business, I've always known he's had these mysterious 100 hours of interviews with Jeffrey Epstein, and so I just, I emailed him long before anybody knew my Substack, and I was like, please let me transcribe these interviews. I will do it for free. I want to hear those interviews. Obviously never emailed me back, but when he came to Substack, he was kind of welcomed like a hero. It was Michael Wolff, and he was here, and we had access, and he had information, and he was the guy who could, bring down this whole investigation with these said 100 hours of interviews. And then you start thinking, like, why haven't we seen those interviews, and where are they? And he kept saying, he's in various interviews with people. I think, did he interview with you? I know he interviewed with Waj, but he kept saying, I don't have, or nobody wants them. That's the.
He did interview with me. He did interview with me. I had a really interesting time with him. I sort of took a different approach than everybody else because I've always been interested in the money of the situation, and I've always wanted to know if Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein ever told him that they were in business together. And he told me something really interesting during that interview because he said, yes, they were. And I asked him for an exact instance. And he gave me an example of when Jeffrey Epstein helped Donald Trump with a large influx of Russian money, which we now know, I believe, was, a gift from the Russians basically to bail him out of bankruptcy. But the fact that he told us that and hadn't put that in any of his books up until then was like, that's crazy. You just broke this little bit of information. You have evidence that the president of the United States and Jeffrey Epstein, this well-known sex trafficker, were in business together, doing work together, and you're only choosing to share it now. You didn't put it in the books you wrote about Trump or anything like that. So I was like, I had my, I shared your concern around that. But you're right. He did a lot of interviews, and he certainly went for the gusto, and he raised a lot of money almost
Raised
$800,000 or
823,
something.
yeah,
It's a lot of money.
$823,000 because he said that Melania was threatening to sue him for saying that he had had sex, or that Epstein no, Trump had sex with Melania for the first time on Epstein's plane. And so he said that Melania was going to sue him for $1 billion. And so he raised almost $1 million for an anti-SLAPP suit against her. She never actually sued him. And he, that kind of opened the door to a little bit of suspicion, because Michael Wolff is a millionaire and he really didn't need to raise the money to pay lawyers from, the pocketbooks of Substackers and the like. But he raised almost $1 million, and the lawsuit never came to fruition. And, he keeps saying that it's so he can get a deposition out of Trump and out of Melania, but he can't with this type of lawsuit. There's no possible way for him to do it. The only thing he can get is if he wins the anti-SLAPP, then they have to pay his legal fees. But if they pay his legal fees, then he still has $823,000 that he's sitting on from the GoFundMe. So that's kind of when it started to fall apart. And then we got a first kind of batch of emails in November, and they were smaller than what we have now, but we started reading the conversations between Jeffrey Epstein and Michael Wolff. And I think a lot of people went, wait a minute, because again, even to this day, he still presents himself as like meeting with the devil and like Epstein's this terrible person. But in their emails, that's not what it reads like. It reads like a friendship. It does read like Michael Wolff wants something from Epstein and his kind of prestige and closeness to power, but then Michael Wolff starts organizing for Epstein. He starts getting him dinners with Woody Allen. He starts like catching and killing these stories that are out to defame, quote unquote, Epstein about his history and like sex trafficking and his old lawsuits and things like that. And he starts to take all this information that credible journalists are writing about Epstein, and he begins to crush it in order to rebuild Epstein's reputation as a philanthropist. And you start to see this different side of Michael Wolff. And then you fast forward into now we have 1,800 pages of emails with Michael Wolff, and he's getting manuscripts for books about Epstein before they're published and trying to like warn Epstein. He's helping him like, with these Wikipedia cleanups so that he looks great. If you search Epstein online, he'll look great. He's trying to crush when Dylan Farrow came out and wrote the story about her father, Woody Allen, in Nick Kristof's blog at the New York Times. He's trying to go out and crush Nick Kristof's reputation. He's trying to decide which person, should we go after Ronan Farrow or should we go after Nick Kristof? And you realize he has become Jeffrey Epstein's fixer. And it's no longer about, he's still wanting to write a book. There are plenty of emails from Michael Wolff saying, this is what the book's going to be about. We need to sit down and write this book. But you start to realize that he holds some power, and you can tell he feels powerful in this position. And you start to see a lot of emails that are not only inappropriate and not only definitely cross the lines of journalism, but you wonder if like there's legality involved. Like there are things that he knows that he never wrote about, he never reported, or he never made public. And you have, again, these 100 hours of interviews that nobody has ever seen.
Why do you think no one has ever seen those?
Well, I think the going story is that he wanted a book deal and no one offered, no one wants the interviews. No one offered him a book deal. I had somebody email me today. Somebody emailed me today very close to Michael Wolff and said those exact words. And I just said, well, then what's behind door number 2? Let's say that that's true. What's behind door number 2? If that never happens, then what is his plan? Is he going to make them public? Is he going to give them to the House Oversight Committee? Like, I get that he doesn't want to give them to the DOJ if he thinks no one would ever see them again. But like, what is he going to do with them? And my thought, I don't think it's totally about him not making money for a book, because I don't think he needs somebody to give him a contract to write a book. He can write $1 million book tomorrow if he wanted to. I think after he's seen these emails come out, he realizes that the things that he said in those emails aren't great for his own reputation. And like the things that were said in those interviews wouldn't be great for his reputation either. But also, the number one thing that Epstein was willing to talk about was Donald Trump. And that is Michael Wolff's source of fame is writing about Donald Trump. And if you completely cut off that source, then he doesn't have his thing, right? His shtick. And I think he worries about giving up too much, and he just doesn't want to. It gives him a little bit of.
That would be my inclination, is to believe that there's stuff on those tapes which are potentially embarrassing, but also potentially incriminating. You couldn't have had 100 hours of conversation with Jeffrey Epstein and not come across crimes or said things that might be incriminating, or being in the environment where crimes might be happening, because there's a lot of that going on in the Jeffrey Epstein universe. Similarly with Donald Trump, and you pointed out an interesting thing, as someone who had insider connections to Epstein and Trump, who may have sounded like enemies to people on the outside, but were not really enemies. They were, to have someone like Michael Wolff pass information from one side to the other when they couldn't otherwise be seen together. I mean, there's no ways in the first presidency of Donald Trump that he could have been out for dinner with Jeffrey Epstein. So if you're going to need to get information in a confidential way, that might be one way of doing it, or you might be spying on one side for the other. I mean, that sort of depends on whether you believe, it depends on whether you think Epstein supported Trump, which I tend to believe absolutely supported Trump in the beginning, but maybe over time changed his mind. But I don't think so. I think a lot of the time, Epstein was a big supporter of Trump, even in the waning days. But it's hard to tell exactly. And I said that just because of the policies. But do you think it was the second version of that it's the spying on each other?
I think it's the spying. I think Michael Wolff loves that idea. Like, if he has information about Trump, if he has information about Epstein, he has full access to both. Both men wanted to meet with him. I mean, there's this idea that Trump doesn't like the books that Wolff writes. He loves the books that Wolff writes. He loves the press. He loves anything like that. And I don't think he had any problem with the things that Wolff wrote about him, even if they weren't the most glorifying things. I think he liked that. And so you had this guy who was bouncing back and forth, and then he started to add in Steve Bannon, and he started to negotiate all the meetings with Steve Bannon and all these important people, Woody Allen. I think he liked to be the negotiator and the meetup guy, and because he started to become everybody's fixer. He was becoming Woody Allen's fixer. He was becoming Epstein's fixer. My guess is he was becoming Trump's fixer, and I think he really, really enjoyed that position.
I mean, I do think that's what he trades on, whether he does so as a professional or otherwise. I think Donald Trump appreciates having someone like Michael Wolff with the reach he has in terms of the ability to move stories and move narratives. Epstein would too. The question becomes always, for me, what's his actual role in a network like that? If he's aware of all these inside information, if he's got all this insight, is it just for himself? Is he just doing it for himself? Or are there other parties out there that could be benefiting from his work? Because let's face it, he's very, very well sourced, well connected, we should say. Yeah. I'm going to play you our friend Michael Cohen and Michael Wolff. I don't know why they chose to do this together, but I think it's a hell of an appearance that Michael Wolff decides to go on Michael Cohen's talk show Mea Culpa, which is supposedly a confession of I'm sorry, or I'm my apologies, whatever it is that you would do if Mea Culpa. But this is them talking about us and other people who are involved at Lev Parnas and some other people who Dean is mentioned here, I think. And what they're talking about is Michael Cohen. We had been on one of our narrative lives, and I asked him some questions that he didn't like, and it ended up being a sort of full meltdown of the next few days. And he would know, he took us all to task and wouldn't. He said a whole bunch of things. Anyway, let's listen to what Michael Cohen and Michael Wolff said to each other about us conspiracy buffs. That's what they call us, conspiracy buffs.
Influencers.
I mean, I don't even quibble with any of those two. But okay, here we go. Let's listen to them.
Claim is through veracity, right? Is through truth, which sort of brings me to this whole thing. Because when you and I were sitting and talking on the street, I was asking you about, for example, Tara Palmieri, Lev Parnas, this guy Zev Shlev, Dean Blundell, L. Leonard, and a whole group of other far left-wing
Far left.
activists in their own minds. They call themselves like influencers, right? Whether it's on whatever platform that they're on. They went and they make all of these statements. Michael Cohen claims he knows nothing about Donald Trump's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. We now have the official government documents that prove he was lying to everyone. In fact, they go ahead and they post the following, which says Cohen also tried to separate the Katie Johnson rape allegation into two different cases on PDB. That's the Patrick Bet-David podcast, claiming he only handled the Jane Doe complaint. But his own timeline collapsed. He described sending private investigators to the accuser's address, calling it a vacant parking lot. Shalev pulled up the actual location. It's a house. The lawyer Cohen contacted turned out to be the same lawyer connected to Katie Johnson. His own words confirmed what investigators had been saying. It was the same case all along. But here's the interesting part, right? The lawyer himself, in a document, in a text message to me, claims, I never dealt with an attorney named Michael Cohen. And then he says, you are conflating two entirely different Jane Doe cases, meaning they're completely wrong, right? And this has caused me, and I know that Tara Palmieri and Lev and others have caused you similar sort of angst and
well, I don't. I mean, yes, they really haven't. I mean, I don't. I mean, I'm aware of these people. I'm hardly aware of them, but there is. I don't know what they seem to me. They're conspiracy buffs. The world is filled with, it's like, crime buffs, conspiracy buffs. I don't know what they get out of this. And I don't know.
Well, they get subscribers and money.
Well, I suppose, they're trying to claw out a living in this desperately difficult business. So I think that's, and this probably, and there is a coterie, I think, of people who are interested in these kinds of conspiracies and the everything piled onto everything and everything conflated. And it's a somewhat of a fantasy world. And I think that they live in that, but that doesn't affect me very much. You get comments, but, I mean, the nice thing about Substack is it's an easy block.
So he's trying to get Michael Wolff to agree with him about this supposed inaccurate reporting, which sounded pretty accurate to me. But he's trying. We
can literally hold up the court cases and show them it's the same.
I mean, he actually.
I've asked the investigators and
he's asking the question, but as he's asking the question, the whole question seems to be falling apart because he realizes that it's not actually true. What he's saying.
Same lawyers on both cases.
Yeah. So Michael Wolff is saying he doesn't buy into it. He doesn't buy in completely. He still bites a little bit on us. He calls us conspiracy buffs, which isn't exactly a bad term, I don't think. I mean, the last time I checked, there are conspiracy theories and there are criminal conspiracies. The word conspiracy is not a bad word, by the way. The word conspiracy is a word to describe a conspiracy, which can be criminal or otherwise. And what we all tend to do is we tend to work around criminal conspiracies. So that makes us criminal conspiracy buffs versus people who are making things up, which is the term conspiracy theory. But I don't know. I can't even work up an emotion around that because I feel like who cares? Who cares?
I was overanalyzing as I was listening to it because, even when he said your name, he's like, "What's the guy?" Oh, Zev Shalev. Like he'd forgotten your name, and then later on, he says we're hysterical and we're opportunists, and it's just all you're doing is literally just pulling up documents that already exist and turning them around and showing people, right? There's no opinion involved. When you talk about this, like the Katie Johnson case, which was not even our point ever. The point was he was saying he knew nothing about Epstein in 12 years of working for Trump during Epstein's height of power. And we said that's impossible. He turned it into the Katie Johnson case that is indeed all the same case. It was refiled twice. It is 3 different court cases, but it's with the same lawyers. Her private investigator has verified that it's all the same case. Like, I don't really get the point of why we're still talking about that over and over
Well, he
again.
wants us to talk about that because he doesn't want us to talk about the other stuff, I think, that there is about him. Because there is so much Michael Cohen stuff that he hasn't spoken about, specifically you say this much better than I do. What's the House of Friendship? Say it again, probably because you're French.
Wait, which one? What one?
The House of Friendship. The
Maison de l'Amitié. Yeah, the house.
I don't get the amitié part right. I just do the amitié.
Yeah.
Amitié.
I don't know.
Well, the Maison de l'Amitié is a good example of where Cohen was highly involved in a potential Russian money laundering deal between Epstein and Trump and Rubelov and Putin that he even acknowledged himself may have been money laundering in one of his books. So he doesn't want to talk about that. So he keeps talking about Katie Johnson. But there is a lot that we could ask Michael Cohen about and Michael Wolff about. And it just strikes me as the two of them together in one place is an indictment on each other. I just think it's, certainly Michael Wolff doesn't need the profile for Michael Cohen. And Michael Wolff is just, slumming it in the gutter with Michael Cohen. If that's where his choice of redemption is coming from, you can come on over to us, Michael. We'll talk to you. I'll be happy to interview both of you together or separately. If you want to come on the show, I will gladly interview both about what's happened to you by these so-called conspiracy buffs that are so mean and angry and trying to take down your life. More importantly, there is a lot of other stuff that you've been discovering, and there's also stuff I want to talk about the Howard Lutnick stuff. But do you want to say anything else about Michael Wolff before we?
I think there's I've posted a lot of things today, and I was like, I'm just gonna go on. Once he said hysterical, I was like, okay, then that's my cue. I'm just gonna go off and start posting some of these things we find because, when Julie K. Brown wrote her article for the Miami Herald, which inevitably brought this case back to the forefront and was reopened, which led to Epstein's arrest. When that happened, Michael Wolff tried to discredit her journalism and get rid of it, basically, and say that it was false. And he was sending Epstein's statements to put out to discredit the work that was being done to reopen the case. And I mean, that's the biggest and most clearest thing in these files is that he was fixing Epstein. He was fixing his reputation and trying to discredit anyone who stood up and said, hey, by the way, there's kids being abused. They'd be like, nope. We're going to discredit you and we're going to talk about your philanthropy.
No, that's the same excuse, or I shouldn't say excuse, that's the same reason that Bannon also says he was doing these interviews with him, with Jeffrey Epstein. He also has 100 hours of interviews, he claims, with Jeffrey Epstein. And he, for the same reason, he was trying to rehabilitate his image. Why do you think they both come around the same line, the same reasoning for doing it?
I think that Bannon and Wolff are like parallel personalities. I get them. Even when we were talking before, I was like, oh, I thought I was talking about Wolff, but I think I'm talking about Bannon. They're very similar. They both came in to sort of feed off of Epstein and what he had to give to them. And then eventually they gained more power and he started feeding off of them because he became more isolated and more under surveillance. And, the FBI started coming after him. But it's a very interesting world where friendships are not friendships. Like, you don't really just hang out with somebody because they're your good friend. There's always give and take. There's competitiveness. There's things to gain and glean from people. And just like Michael Wolff, Bannon had, he'd been fired from the White House. He was licking his wounds. He went to Epstein because Epstein was sort of in the height of his power. And then all of a sudden, Epstein's going downhill and Bannon starts to create this sort of global impact world travel, speaking with global leaders, making deals and starting to kind of make his way back into the White House and people on Trump's team are starting to work with him. And Epstein is just like, I want some of that. And so they developed this deep friendship. And I'm curious, as because again, I've only gone through about 300 pages of these emails with Michael Wolff. I'm curious if we'll start to see a kind of a competitiveness between Bannon and Wolf for vying for Epstein's attention, because they strike me as very, very similar people.
That's interesting. I tend to agree that they are, operating from the same perspective. But I always think, these guys are international espionage operatives, whether you call them spies or whether you call them assets or whatever you want to call them. They operate in that shadowy world between global politics, global finance, global media. And this is their job as much as it is anything else. And so, yes, there'll be all sorts of competitiveness going on, but they will also have all sorts of clients that they're talking to or working for. It's quite possible that one or all of them were working for either the same espionage agency or competing espionage agencies that are cooperating on one thing, or agencies that are all cooperating all the time. I mean, that's very feasible that that's happening. And the reason they are giving the, hey, I'm here for the PR rehabilitation effort, is because that's good cover story. It gives you the media cover story because you can say, hey, I'm just being a journalist or a PR person. I'm just doing some fixing over here. Versus, I'm a spy. I'm working for Saudi Arabia or Israel or whomever, which would, sort of defeat the purpose of being one of those people. So I think that's maybe, possibly, plausibly a plausible reason. We'll never find out who was the spy for whom, although we've come pretty close to confirming that Epstein was directly connected to the Israeli military intelligence and to Russia's intelligence services. But beyond that, we're not going to ever find the work slip or the pay slip of any of these people saying they work for one company or another, one agency or another. I don't think Michael Cohen does, but I think the others do. Sorry, Mr. You said that. What did you say?
No, I said I will stay hopeful that it exists somewhere.
I mean, it exists, yeah, but it's probably under some serious lock and key. So that's what else should we say about Michael Wolff and Michael Cohen? Is there anything else you want to share?
I think Michael Wolff is a little bit lost in the clouds. I think he's a bad guy. I think the things that he writes, you clearly show where his stance was, but I think as of right now, I think he's sort of like floating around and living in Michael Wolff world. I think Michael Cohen is kind of like trying to develop a dream team of people to bolster his image or his point of view or whatever, who are just like unaware of what's going on in the world. And it feels a little scrambly. It feels a little like, I don't know.
I think that's actually a very good point you're making. That's really important for everyone to settle on, because Michael Cohen clearly is in the midst of trying to get a pardon or do some sort of deal with the president of the United States to get that pardon. That quid pro quo looks a little like this. He is going to say that the evidence he gave during the Stormy Daniels case was coerced. He was forced to give it, and therefore he needs to be completely discounted, and that verdict against the president needs to be completely thrown out. He'll do that for Donald Trump, presumably, if Donald Trump gives him some sort of pardon or, some sort of get out of jail free card, whatever it is. The truth of it is, that is all working in this network. Let's call them a network, because that's the word I think fits best, around Donald Trump. I mean, they both are working, if that's the deal that's being constructed, they are working in each other's interests, but it's really the network's interests. It's in the network's interests that Donald Trump get out of his criminal indictments, and it's in Michael Cohen's interest, but it also is the network's interest that indictment gets thrown out. So that all makes sense to me. It aligns in some ways. So that is a deal that's happening. And when you're saying he's collecting people, putting together people, influencers to run this operation, and look at what they're doing. They're coming after us. They're coming after the people who are exposing the truth about them, because they don't want the truth out there. They want us to be discredited. Yeah. They want people not to support us and for us to be disbelieved. And that is why they're both using words like, I don't really know them, I hardly know them, or they know who we are. I mean, I've been writing about Michael Cohen for 10 years. I'm sure he's come across my work many times before. And I'm sure he's not liked my work before too. But definitely he would know who I am, and definitely Michael Wolff knows who I am. So that sort of dampening of who we are, the dampening of our experience, that sort of these are just influences of people that we don't matter, is part of a strategy, I think. And certainly the only reason I could think Michael Wolff would even want to appear with Michael Cohen, like why would he, is because the network
Mhm.
sort of needs it. The network wants it because the network needs to bolster Michael Cohen, give him credibility, but also build this machine in order to discredit us. And that's the only reason I'd actually think about even covering a story like this. Normally, I didn't really like to respond to people's comments about the work, but in this case, I think this is part of the story because it is them actually trying to cut us down, to hurt our reputation in order to bolster their own position, which is ultimately to bolster this deal that he's got, which will get the president off his criminal indictment and him off and give him a pardon. So that's sort of the best framing.
We'll have to see if Michael Wolff wants to go on Laura Loomer.
There's another example of somebody else that these are the biggest names in the Trump world. Laura Loomer, as much as we will dislike her, she's a big name in that world. That's two big names that he's got who would otherwise have no reason to be part of his universe, but they're choosing to. It not only makes me think, well, that makes you look pretty suspicious. It makes me think that you're part of that network.
Right.
But it also makes me think that there's a much bigger project going on here.
They call this like left. What do they call us? Left
extreme left.
Extreme activist, whatever it is. Like that terminology just makes me go, oh, okay. So the only people who use that terminology are people who are on the right. So if that's where you're going, then just go. You're not going to get the support on the left anymore if you decide to go that direction. But yeah, I clipped together a couple of things that was just from one interview that he did with Joanne Reed, where he goes, "No, I'm definitely not getting a pardon. That's not what I'm trying to do." And then he's going like, "But I do want Trump to sign here and here." And she goes, "That's a pardon," And it's just like, that's what if that's what you're trying to do, just say it. I don't think Trump wants to give him a pardon. I don't think he's interested.
Yeah.
But
I think he will. He'll give him a pardon if it gets off the. Okay. If he gets off, if Cohen comes through and he says that testimony was all coerced and it helps take, clean up Trump's record, absolutely, he'll get a pardon. Yeah. He's as transactional as anything. That guy, if you're throwing a little bit of money, he'll probably do it without that as well. He seems to be selling them for like $1 million a piece. Ellie, I know you've got to run, so I'm going to let you do that because you got an important event to go to. So good luck to your team, and I hope they win. And everyone should check out the panicked writer Ellie Leonard's incredible Substack, where she writes about all things Epstein, but a lot more on that Substack. Tell everyone what they can find right now and how they can get in touch with you.
Okay, so right now I've been really focusing on the Hilton Head, South Carolina investigation, which got a lot of publicity today. Everybody, it was wonderful to see all these news outlets talking about the story and in depth and giving it, I feel, the spotlight that it deserves. The folks at the Post and Courier in Charleston, I believe, are doing some incredible investigative work down there, and they were very kind to include some of my stuff that I've been working on in the Post. So I'm really happy to just see that getting some visibility because those were the missing interviews that we were talking about a few weeks ago that came to light. So I'm continuing to focus on that. I'm continuing to focus on the Michael Wolff emails, and there are things behind the scene that I will continue to work on.
We should actually do more of this week, maybe even tomorrow if you can. I don't remember because we have to finish the whole conversation. There's so much more we wanted to talk about. I'm going to keep rambling on a little bit about crypto and do some Michael Carsbo, Jacob Carsbo interviewing. But thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for sharing your extreme left-wing views and your influencer criminal buffery with all of us. Have a good night.
My dance videos coming up. All right, I'll see you later.
We form a band called the Conspiracy Buffs. I like it.
Yes, I like it. Okay, I'll talk to you later.
I can't sing though at all. So the great Ellie Leonard. I don't know what to say about Michael Cohen or Michael Wolff, except that if you have anything you want to say, if you want to talk about the truth, come over. I'll interview both of you. I'll interview you separately. I am dying to hear your points of view about everything you have to say because. At the end of the day, that's our job, is to get to the truth. And anyone who wants to reveal anything, I will gladly have you on the show. If you know stuff about what happened with Jeffrey Epstein, if you know stuff that happened with Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, I want to hear from you, and I'll gladly interview both of you. I don't imagine it'll happen anytime soon, but have no problem having both of you on the show. I want to talk a little bit about two things quickly before we disappear. One is the story I just published yesterday on narrative.org, all about Jeffrey Epstein's ties to the crypto capture of America. Now, that all sounds like, what the hell are you talking about? It sounds like you're a conspiracy buff. You know, what is this buffery you're talking about? Crypto is very hard to get your head around. The idea that there's a capture of America by people who are proponents of cryptocurrency is equally a complicated and sort of out there idea. The idea that it involves this company called Cantor Fitzgerald, which has been around for a very long time and is now owned indirectly by a stable coin company called Tether, and that the owner of Cantor Fitzgerald is now the commerce secretary in the Trump regime. I mean, these are all things that are sort of like out of this world, that each be an incredibly complicated and out of this world plot line in any movie. Yet they all seem to be, you know, arriving at the story and combining in this one story. What I could not believe is when I discovered the role that Jeffrey Epstein had in creating the model, in designing the model that the Trump regime is now trying to bring out in the world, trying to make happen in the world, which is to introduce cryptocurrency as a legitimate alternative to the US dollar and maybe even replace the US dollar. And the best way for me to do this is to show you this diagram, which again looks incredibly complicated, but I'll walk you through some of the emails. When I found out that Cantor Fitzgerald was actually owned by Tether, the stablecoin company, through a loan that they give the the Howard Lutnick family in order to buy Cantor Fitzgerald, because he had to divest of Cantor Fitzgerald when he became the Commerce Secretary. He said, I'll sell it to my kids in a trust. They didn't have the money to buy it. So instead, Tether, the stablecoin company, paid the family so they could buy their stake in Cantor Fitzgerald. Now that's okay. So what? Who cares, right? That happens. It's not so kosher that the same company, Tether, also uses Cantor Fitzgerald to be the custodian of all their US dollar equivalents. So every time you buy a stable coin, it's pegged to the dollar. So that company needs to have an equivalent amount of US dollar treasuries in some sort of custodian care. And in this case, that custodian care is Cantor Fitzgerald. They take $133 billion of money and they buy US Treasury bills for that, and they keep it so that the $133 billion in cryptocurrency is secured against something that's actually real and tangible. In this case, supposedly the most safe investment in the world, US Treasury dollars. Now, the fact that Tether is now the company that both sells the cryptocurrency and is also the owner indirectly of the company that secures that cryptocurrency is a closed loop. And it's a serious problem because it means that engine, if it breaks at any part, breaks the whole thing. And that's on itself just a really fascinating thing, that there is an incredible conspiracy happening between Howard Lutnick, who, by the way, as the Commerce Secretary, would be able to decide which company gets the bailout if it should need it in another crash. And that company might include Cantor Fitzgerald. Well, geez, he's going to give Cantor Fitzgerald a bailout if they need it. Of course, he'll give Cantor Fitzgerald a bailout if they need it. It's his company after all. So he's in a conflicted situation. Tether is a highly volatile instrument that is ultimately right now strapped to the US economy like a ticking time bomb. If anything happens to Tether and those $133 billion in treasuries have to be redeemed in a hurry, it's going to create a huge, huge problem in the economy in general, because the US dollar, treasury dollar bills, the yield will decline. That'll cause a huge spike in interest rates. And that will tear apart people's financial stability and the US market, the stock market that's going on. Already, that's another layer of complexity. But now here comes the third layer. Here is Jeffrey Epstein, who it turns out in 2013 pitched Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, about all of this. I find this just a stunning piece of information to think that Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted child trafficker, was in 2013 writing Vladimir Putin with this idea. And this idea was to basically overhaul, let's call it that, the entire US or the global financial system and replace America's dominance in that global system with Russian dominance using a bunch of different factors. And I'm going to pull up these so you can follow along with me. I guess this email works the best because you can see both sides here. Let me do it this way. This one might be better again. So what you're seeing here is an exchange between Thorgan Jagland, who is a diplomat from Norway, who was the head of the World Council at one point, which is sort of a Russian entity, but nevertheless, he was very connected to Vladimir Putin, had direct access to Vladimir Putin. And in the email that you're seeing here, and we should start at the lower part of this email, is Jeffrey Epstein basically reaching out to Thorgan Jagland, and he's saying to him that, reminding him of what was the Sputnik program. Remember, the Sputnik program was the leapfrog that Russia was able to do over America in the science world, in the space world. He says when Sputnik was announced, the West was left flat-footed, or caught flat-footed. The same can now happen with Russia taking the lead in finance. Instead of competing with the West for nanotech, copying Silicon Valley, looking for startups, playing catch-up to Microsoft, Apple, Google, and the like, Russia can get out in front and leapfrog the global community by reinventing the financial system of the 21st century. That whole statement is incredibly ambitious, obviously, but think about what he's saying here. He's saying just like Sputnik was able to overhaul the way people viewed space and overtake America in the space race, now there is a way for you to do the same in Russia using finance. So he's identified cryptocurrencies, he's identified all of this area as a potential point of dominance for Russia over America. And then he's saying all these efforts that you've been doing, because these are the efforts that we know Russia's been doing. Nanotech, Silicon Valley, the startups, the Microsoft, they've been doing all this for a long time. They haven't been able to catch up because they can't catch up. It's hard to catch up against Silicon Valley. Instead of doing that, he's saying, get out in front and leapfrog the global community by reinventing the financial system for the 21st century. Now, what does that reinvention look like? Well, you don't have to look very far to figure out what it is. It's cryptocurrency. It's one of the biggest and most important innovations, potentially, in the way banking is done. The blockchain is not necessarily Bitcoin, not necessarily crypto, but the blockchain is a very important piece of technology. So then he goes on to say, since banks were invented in the 1600s in Venice, little has changed. And though technology has enabled new speed paradigm, fundamentally it's still the same. As you know, I helped craft the derivative markets in the States in the 70s. This is a big deal. If Epstein is claiming, and he claims here in this email to have invented the derivative market, we're talking about that, all that era that led up to the crash of 2008 and the general plunging of the economy from 1987 onwards in various crashes that happened. Sorry, excuse me. So all of that is important to note and important to remember. Russia is uniquely, he says here, unique in its capability to execute on a grand vision, a new form of money. On a worldwide basis, it is much larger than any single project envisioned by any government, and at its core, not really that difficult to bring to fruition. So he's saying, we can do this. We've got cryptocurrency. We've got all these other technologies that are coming to light. I did it in the 1970s. I created the derivative market. That was disruptive then. I've got something just as disruptive coming now. I know how to do it. It's a new form of money. We assume that is cryptocurrency. And I know how I'm going to do it for you, Russia, in order to overtake the financial world and the financial dominance of the United States. That is a phenomenal piece of literature, email documentation that we have now of Jeffrey Epstein as the architect of what he would call the overhaul of the financial system in the world. So then Thorgan Jagland is saying, hey, Jeffrey, this is not so easy for me to explain to Putin. You have to do it. My job is to get a meeting with him. Can I say this? I know that you want to attract foreign investment to diversify Russian economy, and that you had a meeting with several investors last time you were in the United States, but not much has come out of it. I have a friend that can help you to take the necessary measures and then present you and ask whether it is interesting to him to meet with you. This is Jagland negotiating how he's going to pitch Jeffrey Epstein's pitch to Putin. And he's going to tell Putin, hey, you've had a hard time getting foreign investment. I've got the guy that's going to help you get foreign investment. And then he suggests that he has this meeting with Putin. Now, we don't know if the meeting happened or not. I know you want to know. I want to know too. But that is pretty much off the books. But we do know that Epstein visited Russia several times. He had visas to Russia. He met with the deputy economic ministers on several occasions. He had a direct contact with that same economic minister. It's not like he was a stranger to Russian diplomacy or intelligence. He knew that community pretty well. There's also this happened the day after that exchange. In the Epstein files, we find in the Google Calendar that he had put in a date and a project called Prepare Putin Paper that he did the day after that pitch went in. So clearly he was working towards creating that pitch for Vladimir Putin. There is a follow-up back and forth, which I have on the site, which I really encourage everyone to look at, because he also demands that if he meets with Putin, it's got to be a 2 to 3 hour meeting at minimum, and that it's got to be away from the maddening crowds of St. Petersburg or any of the other places that Putin is always stalked at. So now look at this map again of how Jeffrey Epstein connects. We've explained to you how he connects to Vladimir Putin. We've explained to you that Cantor Fitzgerald closed loop that we see there around Tether at the bottom, and there's Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary. So into this dude called Brock Pierce, who is a really eccentric-looking guy, and I'm going to try and see if I can find you the photo that we showed you in the Rolling Stones, because it does give you a good, Rolling Stone, I should say, that does give you a good sense of what this guy looks like and the kind of character he is. So here he is. Brock Pierce. He's a billionaire now. I think he's worked as an actor, as a bit actor, maybe not even that famous an actor in Hollywood for many years. And there he is, celebrated on the cover of Rolling Stone Arabia. From Hollywood fame to blockchain fortune, he's described as a crypto visionary. A crypto visionary must be nice for him. Now, I don't know if Brock Pierce has the credentials to come up with anything related to Bitcoin or anything like that, but he has certainly been a big factor in promoting Bitcoin since its inception. So much so that he became the advisor to Jeffrey Epstein on everything crypto. So this guy is the guy that Jeffrey Epstein would pick up the phone and say, hey, Brock, what do you think about this idea? What do you think about this investor? Yada, yada. Now, it's interesting that Brock Pierce's, one of his claim to fame was that he invented the stable coin known as Tether. There's that name again, Tether. So Tether is the stable coin that you peg against the US dollar. You buy US dollar treasury bills, and suddenly they are secured, and you now can use Tether as a secure currency, which is harder to do with regular cryptocurrency. So what does that do to this picture here? If you look at it this way, now you've got Brock Pierce connected to the invention of Tether, which means Jeffrey Epstein is connected to the invention of Tether. And Jeffrey Epstein's neighbor is the current Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who was his neighbor for many years and was in business with Jeffrey Epstein for many years, and who came to visit Jeffrey Epstein on his island, and who knew him for, those 20 years almost, that they were neighbors. that is beginning to look like a very tight circle of people all involved in the same crypto scheme that could tank the US economy. Then there's this third chain here, which is the Gulf Money Pipeline. And it's a bit misleading in this graphic because it does show that Steve Witkoff and Jeffrey Epstein are sort of connected to each other. I don't have that connection solidly confirmed, but let's assume there is some sort of connection. What we do know is that Witkoff is a big part of the Trump strategy to use crypto. He and Donald Trump's kids, his kids and Donald Trump's kids, are involved in a very big crypto company called World Liberty Financial. And so there is a connection there between Trump and Witkoff that you can almost put Trump's face there, only he can't put his face there because he's the president and can't be seen to be doing this. But technically, Witkoff acts as the guy representing the Middle East interests and Donald Trump's interests. So why is it interesting that we have the Middle East advisor to Donald Trump, Steve Witkoff, who's negotiating peace, amongst other things, in Iran? Why is he involved in cryptocurrency? And the picture becomes much clearer when we do it, when you see that World Liberty Financial, 49% of that company was sold to Sheikh Tahnoon, who's described as the spy sheikh of the UAE, for $500 million, right before the president became the president in 2016, I believe, or this would be 2024. The other owner of World Liberty Financial, which is a Trump family company, it's making $1 billion in profits, is MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and then Qatar, which is also responsible for funding the $2 billion gift that went into World Liberty Financial to establish a stable coin that is a competitor to Tether, which was known as the USDT, the US dollar stable coin, which is competing with Tether. So Jeffrey Epstein now is closely connected to these three countries at the bottom here, on the side here. He's connected to the UAE through his many contacts. He's connected to Sheikh Tahnoon directly. He's connected to MBS directly. We show you how he visited the Louvre Museum with Mohammed bin Salman when it was a private, closed viewing just for MBS. And we've shown you his connections to Qatar throughout the way, throughout these many investigations that we've done. There is something very fundamentally important to recall when you look at this map. What crypto does and what the scheme is potentially trying to do is to create a bubble in the economy in order to crash it. They're pumping up the market. And the way they're pumping up the market is they're using US dollar treasuries, which they're buying with the rise of crypto. They're investing in these stable coins. These stable coins are then being bought as and secured by the cryptos, by the US Treasury bills. And so these US dollar Treasury bills are increasing the stock market, and they're keeping the US bond market afloat too, which is keeping prices low for you and me to buy groceries, and is keeping the stock market buoyant. But it is a bubble. There's no way that you can do this without it being a bubble. And ultimately, that bubble is going to keep expanding until it crashes at just the right moment. Now, that right moment is where a lot of money can be made. Because if you sell before that crash, because you know where that crash is, you're going to make a fortune. And then when you, at the bottom of the market, you then have all that cash that you made when it was high, and you start buying things when they are low, you can make a fortune of money, because now you've taken assets that were astronomically high, you couldn't afford before. Now you can afford them because you're buying them at pennies on the dollar after the crash. So you've made a ton of money on the way up, you sell it just the right place, it crashes, and then you buy all the stuff for dirt cheap at the bottom. And that's the way capitalism has always worked, right? I mean, capitalism, you buy high, you sell low, everyone knows that. Except when you're rigging the market and you know when the high is and when you know when the low is, you're in control. You're in control of who will make the money and when that will happen and how you can profit maximally from it. And this network that we're seeing operate here did the same thing in 2008 before the 2008 crash. That's why if you can't, take a look at The Greatest Heist Book 2. It's published at narrative.org. There are 9 chapters. There'll probably be 2 more very important to understand exactly what happened in 2008 with Jeffrey Epstein and Howard Lutnick, by the way, is being repeated now in 2026 with cryptocurrency replacing the mortgage-backed securities that were the derivative-based entity or technology which crashed in 2008. So what we're seeing now is nothing less than a crime in progress, a rigging of the American market. And it's not just a rigging of the American market so some guys can get rich. It is the most extraordinary amount of wealth that is being transferred from the American Treasury, from the American taxpayer, into the hands and pockets of these Middle Eastern companies, of the MBS, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar, and other related entities. And Russia, of course, can't leave Russia out because they're a big piece of this, and China. So you've got this network of, and Israel. Did I mention them? I got to mention Israel because people tell me otherwise I'm being biased. And Israel. There is a group of countries that have been rigging the world's economy and rigging America's economy in order to gain as much money and control of it as possible, stealing that wealth, transferring that wealth into the United States, out of the United States into their hands of these crown princes and their various entities around the world. And that is the broad range of how this crime is being undertaken. So this discovery that Jeffrey Epstein was pitching Vladimir Putin in 2013 about how he wanted to achieve the goal that we're now seeing play out in real time. Well, that's how you can tell that this is could not be that prophetic. He could not be that much of a predictor of the world to imagine this completely outlandish, impossible to believe plot that some sort of digital currency was going to replace everything in a future world that only a few people could make money out of, and yada yada yada. He just couldn't imagine that in a world of 2013. Out of Barack Obama, most loved, stable president in a long time, no one could imagine an attack on the American economy where a president beholden to Russia would crash the economy in order to make cryptocurrency become the world currency while his allies in the Middle East stole the wealth of Americans. But yet here we are. That's sort of the sum total of the story that we're telling. And I might just leave it there. I want everybody to pay as much attention as you can to crypto and to the story. It is available in multiple parts on narativ.org, narativ.org. They are paywalled because I got to pay for life and I got to pay for all the content we make here. It's incredibly expensive to investigate a lot of this stuff and to produce all this content. And ultimately, we rely on funding. And the only funding we're getting is from you. And you are the people who support this investigation. None of this, I believe, would ever come out if it weren't for the support of people like you who help subscribe to Narativ and who fund these investigations. I know personally I ran out of resources many years ago to be able to do this on my own money, almost lost everything I had. So the reality of it is this is not the kind of thing an individual can pursue or an ordinary individual can pursue. Maybe if you're of spectacular wealth, you can. But for me, that was not an option. I need the support of people like you who care about the truth and who also care about the future of America, who care about the fact that America's wealth is being stolen, that America's birthright is being stolen in many ways, and that the dream that America was built on, this idea of a government that worked for the people, a dream that we'd all subscribe to, that this government was going to be better because it was going to be this representative government that worked on behalf of our interests. Well, that's going, and if we don't step in right now to ensure that this capital wealth is not stolen from America, it's our next generation, your kids, and the next generation after that, and many generations down the line that will continue to pay the price of this incredibly criminal government that has taken over the American presidency and indeed the House and many other aspects of our institutions like the Supreme Court and the media, which is happening right now, also very, very frightening. I am going to let this stand there. If anybody has any questions, I've got a couple of minutes here, so I will. I'll take any of your questions. I'm looking at the Substack chat and the YouTube chats. If you guys have any any questions. I'm going to try grab them and see if I can. Going to buy your book. Well, it's not actually a book. It's on narativ.org, narativ.org. It's just a chapter by chapter. And there's 2 books. The Greatest Heist one tells you the story of how Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were co-opted by Russia in the 1980s. Their whole story of how they became assets for Vladimir Putin now, but also back then, the KGB. And book 2 is all about 2008 and how the crash of 2008 was manipulated by Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump, and it also includes the Howard Lutnick piece from that as well. People are asking, I hope you shared it with Ron Wyden. I know people have shared my work with Ron Wyden, and I know he's aware of it. I've shared a bunch of stuff with various congressional people. That's all I can do. I can't do much more than that. I'm sure they are aware. I get feedback a lot of the time from people inside the broader world that is the sort of shadow government or the shadow world between governments and politics and finance. And this is resonating, and it's certainly hitting a lot of eyeballs, and people are very aware of the story. It's not like they don't know about it, but I've not heard from Ron Wyden's team. And if anyone wants to contact me from Ron Wyden's team, I'd be more than happy to share what I know about this. I thank you very much for all the compliments. It's great to hear that from everybody, and I really appreciate all the that with the enormous amounts of gratitude. So thank you very much for all the nice things you're saying. Can you post this information? This is a free broadcast, and this will be free on the website right after we get off. I'll leave it up there on narativ.org. It'll take me some time to put a summary together, but right afterwards, you'll be able to see this entire thing, the Ellie interview we did earlier, and indeed this as part of the same hour on narativ.org. I think I don't see many other questions. Well, I see lots of nice things, but I don't see a lot of questions. So I'm going to leave it there. I was going to, and I may still try to do this, play you an interview that I did with Jacob Carsbo earlier on today, because there is another big story that is happening in the world right now that you could really only describe as, if you think the other stuff we've been talking about is terrifying, this stuff might really terrify you. Pete Hegseth has been talking about the greater North America as a new strategy inside the Pentagon and the White House. The intention of this rethink of the world is to basically think of the North American continent as America's continent, and to basically force the security interests and the national interests of America on Canada, on Greenland, which is of course Denmark, on Panama, on Ecuador, Mexico, you name it, all those countries. It is a stunning piece of sort of bravado. I can't believe that they've gone out there and they've put out the statement, which basically says, you all have to agree with me, with the United States, or we're coming after you. So I spoke to Jacob Carsbo, a former Danish intelligence officer, about the comments from Pete Hegseth. But here is Pete Hegseth's comments first. And I think I'm playing them, if I'm not mistaken. Here.
That's why President Trump has drawn a new strategic map from Greenland to the Gulf of America to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory north of the equator, from Greenland to Ecuador and from Alaska to Guyana, is not part of the global South. It is a security perimeter in this great neighborhood that we all live in. Each one of these countries border either the North Atlantic or the North Pacific. Each one of these countries sits north of the 2 basic geographic barriers that exist in this region, the Amazon and the Andes Mountains. Geography that we don't teach in schools as much as we should. And the South Pacific.
Wait, I managed to play a lot of things all at the same time, but they won't stop. So let me do this, and then to add this one, and hopefully this is my interview with Jacob Carsbo.
Infrastructure and resources in partnership with us and other Western nations. This is what we did in World War II. From Greenland to the Gulf of America to the Panama Canal and its surrounding countries. At the Department of War, we call this strategic map the Greater North America. Why? Because every sovereign nation and territory north of the equator, from Greenland to Ecuador and from Alaska to Guyana, is not part of the global South. It is a security perimeter in this great neighborhood that we all live in. Each one of these countries border either the North Atlantic or the North Pacific. Each one of these countries sits north of the two basic geographic barriers that exist in this region, the Amazon and the Andes Mountains. This is basic geography.
Well, while we dive into that basic geography, because this is kind of funny the way he describes it all, let's just get to the point here, Jacob, because ultimately what he's saying is nothing new. America's always had a great sphere of influence across all of what they're calling greater North America. But this is a very different presidency with a very different posture to the world. And in the way we're hearing it, at least I think I'm hearing it here in Canada, is it's like a protection racket, but on steroids. It's either you come along with us or we'll take you over.
Yeah, it seems to be like that. It's an elaboration of the national security strategy from December. It seems, where you also had that talk about the Americas and the Western Hemisphere and the domination within that hemisphere. Now, we don't know what exactly Hexeth is talking about in terms of partnership, etc., etc., and from the Danish perspective, we don't know what is he suggesting in terms of the approach towards the Kingdom of Denmark.
But I think what he's saying is that he wants Greenland, or they'll take Greenland, and that's what they want cooperation on. I mean, it sounds like between the lines of what Donald Trump has been saying lately about NATO and what he's been saying about Greenland in the past, and this strategy, it seems like it's join us or else.
Yeah, it could be, and there's also, some nervousness, I gather, in Denmark and actually in Europe in general, that with the difficulties and the challenges the Trump administration is having in Iran, the backlash persecution of this war and the whole planning and lack of objectives, etc., etc. As was this domination of greater North America is a real risk. So definitely from the European side, we have to be on our toes.
Of course, if they're going to start opening up a new front to include Greenland, they need ammunition, and they seem to be running pretty low on that. Plus, if they're sending ground troops into Iran, they'll be focused on Iran. I mean, I can't see them doing two fronts. They can't even manage the one front right now.
No, it seems far-fetched, but it could be, if this goes sour, even more sour than it is already in Iran and the Middle East, then to pull out and just claim a victory and then go full throttle in the Arctic towards Greenland. That's a distinct risk that we have to reckon with.
I guess
And
the
also,
response.
I should say also, with these statements that Trump has made about the NATO allies not helping out in the middle, you should remember we've not been asked about this war, etc. And then when
Right.
things go south, Trump expects us to come and help out, clear out his mess. Of course, we can't do that. And then with all that deep going on, there is obviously a great risk towards Greenland.
Now, we heard a couple of weeks ago that the Danish actually had sent, live combat-ready troops to Greenland a few weeks ago. That they were anticipating something very real, or at least being prepared for something very real in terms of a conflict with America. This is unusual, of course. You don't get two NATO countries standing off against each other with real weapons very often. And here we are looking at the exact scenario. Is it the end of NATO?
Well, if Trump to attack Greenland, the Danish Prime Minister has said that, and I'm sure most of Europe agrees. perhaps with the exception of Hungary, but Viktor Orban's Hungary. We're in a really bad place, and Denmark now, and what happened already in January with the close cooperation with our European allies and with Canada, and we have time now to elaborate that and to have even more of a forced presence in Greenland. Ironically, there was this huge NATO exercise up near Norway in the Norwegian Arctic just last week or the week before, and the U.S. participated, and things were going quite well. But I think from the European perspective, it's always like it's not like it was. Everyone is training, and the soldiers are doing their job, obviously, and the military to military cooperation is reasonable. But in the minds of the decision makers in Europe, there's always this: what are we supposed to be thinking here? So it's a very, very challenging time.
Just one last question here. If you've got all these countries in North America, like Mexico potentially under threat, Ecuador, Panama, Cuba is clearly under threat already. Venezuela has already sort of been taken, if you will. You've got Canada. Can you see all those countries cooperating with a remnant of NATO or a Greenland plus NATO kind of alliance, which would involve Denmark and other European countries? Can you see that that whole grouping of nations, cooperating in terms of a joint military defense?
I mean, in some respects, there's a long way to go, but I can see it because once the political decisions are there and the political willingness to move ahead, countries can do it. But of course, they hold back because they want to salvage what can be salvaged. But if push comes to shove, that's what we'll see. How far it will go, but obviously the rest of NATO, except the US, I think will be there, and there is already dialogue. You will know that Denmark and 8 other countries have signed an agreement with France about nuclear deterrence and working into that whole nuclear umbrella that France has, and that will be expanded even further. And the thing is about these discussions, when you have discussions already at the nuclear level, that's
Mhm.
at the pinnacle of,
Right.
of, of everything. So when countries discuss nuclear sharing and nuclear deterrence, participation in nuclear exercises, etc., then we're at the pinnacle, and then everything else trickles down.
Right.
So that really tells you the alarm mode that's in Europe. We'll have to see what happens.
We will indeed. Jacob Karsbo is the former senior analyst with the Danish intelligence. Jacob, thank you so much for being here.
And ironically, Sev, I have to add this. I'm
Yes.
actually on vacation, and I'm standing about 10 kilometers just behind me here down in the valley. You have the main base for the French Alp force. These Arctic soldiers that deploy in the mountains and go up to Arctic and
Oh, wow.
actually help Denmark. So actually, these old friends of mine in this village where I used to work here many years ago. They've all been instructors down in this regiment.
So it's just
The
coincidence you're there. You're not actually
Yeah,
there for anything official, right?
it's quite interesting.
Well,
But there's
that
a
force
little
will be
anecdote.
useful. No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. We should also tell everyone about your book because it's out in Danish and everyone wants to read it if they
Yeah,
speak or read Danish. Tell everyone about the book.
yeah. I mean, it's whole Denmark and Europe is under from the Trump administration and from Putin from the east, and it's called Subverted, and it's about how this whole Trump approach is subverting in general terms and also from the intelligence perspective, that used to be my profession. Hopefully we can get it translated. It's hard to get the right context in North America to have these things translated before you are a big star
I
in
know it's
North
really difficult
America.
in Canada
So,
getting anything published.
so we'll see if we can get anyone to publish it.
I might have a contact for you on
and
that.
so on
Actually,
and
I'll
so
share it
forth.
with you later. And also, thank you very much for being here tonight. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Talk to you soon, Seb. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Jacob. Jacob
do have another
Carsbo is
thing,
joining me
Jacob,
from France, is where he was. He's on a skiing vacation. And I thank you very much for his time. What he's saying there about this Greater North America project that is now part of the Pentagon policy is really frightening. I mean, you in the chat were talking a lot about how this is mob extortion. It is, in fact, exactly that, because none of these countries, Canada, Greenland, Mexico, Panama, Ecuador, none of these countries agree with America's policy. So for America to institute some sort of greater America security enforcement project where they all have to listen to what America says, even though politically and policy-wise they disagree, well, that just sets up a really impossible situation. This is like the scene from The Godfather or Goodfellas, where mob person number one walks in and tells the store owner, you will pay us this money and we will protect your store. And if you don't, or else what'll happen. Because that's exactly what this feels and sounds like, is America acting like a mob enforcer, acting like a racketeer, looking for protection money, basically from its neighbors or else. So keep that in mind. This is a big story, the North America strategy, as are all the stories we covered today. There's a thread throughout them all, whether it's Ellie Leonard and I talking about Michael Wolff and Michael Cohen and their strategy in order to discredit our work, in order to basically stop the truth from coming out by criticizing us, by talking about us like we're making things up, like we're conspiracy theorists or conspiracy buffs, whatever he called us. That nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, my interest is in the truth. Ellie's interest is in the truth. Whoever has the truth will find it, and I'd be happy to interview anybody. But it gives you a sense of the organized way that this network is looking to crush anyone who says anything against them or anyone who exposes the truth about them. You can see that through the use of people like Loomer, Michael Cohen, and Michael Wolff. Secondly, the second story was all about the crypto story, and the other piece of investigation I've been doing around Jeffrey Epstein's involvement in the crypto network and the extraordinary work he's been doing or had doing that for Vladimir Putin. I mean, that really just seemed to be the story here, is that Epstein created an environment for Russia to leapfrog over America using cryptocurrency. And it looks like through all these connections, whether it's Lutnick and Tether or Piers Brock or the Saudi and UAE connections that he had, that project that he was working on has come to fruition. And that indeed, these very, very same entities are in the middle of a pump and dump scheme that could crash the US economy. And then you ended there with Jacob Carsbo, who's no slouch at all, who's a chief analyst for the Danish intelligence organization, or former at least, although I don't think you ever leave those organizations, sharing his perspective on what it means for the Pentagon to have a greater Northern American strategy amongst countries that don't agree with it, could set up at the fall of NATO, could see a conflict between Denmark and other European countries and Canada against the United States, which is, of course, a horrific and unbelievable scenario you would never have imagined just a few years ago. That is our coverage tonight on Narativ Live. Thank you for being here. We will be back tomorrow at 3 o'clock with a 5-stack, plus many, many other interesting reports as we go through the day. And who knows what the news is going to deliver in the next 24 hours. Certainly, a lot has happened in the last 24 hours. You can't imagine what might be next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support to Narativ. And have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you again tomorrow.